Okay, so Kevin, we are here talking about some of the water deaths here in Austin, Texas, and I want to talk to you about whether or not these are what you think these are, and if they're connected to the overall larger smiley face killing theory, the theory of these serial killings across the country that you've been working on for well over 20 years now. But before we get into that,
Right.
can you let anybody watching this know who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, my name's Kevin Gannon. I'm a retired detective sergeant with the NYPD. I was in multiple investigative units from anti-crime, narcotics, robbery units, and then eventually, my last 2 years, I supervised the Bronx Homicide Task Force Night Watch Division, which was all, homicides that were committed during the midnight to 8 shift. And then we would have everything prepared. We did all the canvases, whether it's electronic surveillance, whether it was, door to door person interviews. What did you hear? What did you see? Blah, 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 taking pictures, crime scene. We'd have everything ready for the detectives to, start finish it up and banging on all the doors in the morning when they got in at 8 o'clock and have everything set out, from the medical examiner, from the body being removed, and then they could go to work, try to put it together.
So, can you let people know what the smiley face killer theory is and how it got started back in 1997?
Right. Well, yeah, I had 3 cases. The first case was Patrick McNeil in 1997, who went missing from a bar in Manhattan, wound up in the East River, 12 miles away. And after some research that I had done with water currents and from the New York City Harbor Unit, found out that that body should not have wound up in Brooklyn where it was. And the only way it would have gotten there would have been if the individual had been driven to that location and deposited out there. So right there, I knew it was suspicious. I had 2 other deaths within the next year, and all under similar circumstances like that. In fact, the third case, Larry, the second case, he was found 9 miles away, so 9 and 12. But the other young man, Josh Bender, was on the west side of Manhattan, and he was only just crossing campus to go study for an exam with some friends, and he winds up in the Hudson River, kind of where Sully landed the plane down there. And I was like, how does he get in the water there? I mean, he's only going to study. So he was Jewish. They never even did an autopsy on him, so we don't even know if he was beat over the head with a sledgehammer or a pipe or something. So those 3 cases put me on a trail that I thought something was wrong. I got, which just they tell you not to do. I got emotionally involved with the first 2 families, and I told them that when I retired, I would search and find out the true story, what happened to their sons. Next thing I know, I found a bunch of cases in 2002 after I retired. Chris Jenkins out in Minneapolis, there was like 4 kids and 1 kid in Wisconsin. There was like 4 kids that went missing in like a 9-day period. I was like, that was too much to happen. It was too similar to what I had. So I started looking into that. And anyway, long story short was, about 6 months later, I came back and there was like this website, Drowning in Coincidence, because I had gotten sick at the time. I got cancer from being on the World Trade Center and all that. And what happened was I came back like after my chemo and all that stuff, and I found that there was like 35 cases now. I'm like, what the heck? All over the country, mostly around the I-94 corridor. And at that point, I called my old partners, Mike Donovan and Anthony Duarte, and see if they wanted to help me with this. And we started going cross country. And we met this professor who did a study on some cases that were in that area around Minnesota, Wisconsin and stuff. And he called it the I-94 corridor, with these graduate students in crime mapping crime mapping class that he had. And he, on his criminal justice class, and he had a distinct pattern that showed east, west, north, south. And then it duplicated east, west, north, south. So I was like, that's very specific. That was even more than what we had. So I was like, that can't be accidental. That is definitely a pattern. So we got in touch with him. He joined forces. And at that point, we started going all across country. I rented a van, everything on our own dime. And we just started investigating the cases to see if they were connected, get autopsy reports, and then see if there was missing pieces that we could put together, which wound up being a lot of different pieces, which we've determined 13 distinct pieces of graffiti. And everybody only concentrates on the smiley face, but there's 12 other distinct pieces that we know that are specific to the geographical location at which we go to. You know what I mean?
So how have you determined that the I-94 corridor, those killings, how have you determined that those are connected for anybody that's not super familiar with what the case is?
Right. Well, because of the smiley faces and the graffiti being similar, especially we didn't tell the number one and number two. We just gave you the smiley face because then we know we didn't want copycat killers, and we know if the other symbols are there, they're connected to us. And the reason why the smiley faces is different, people go, oh, they're not the same. Of course they're not the same, because it's not one serial killer traveling across the country. This is actually well-structured, organized group that have, cells in major cities throughout the United States, whether it's East Lansing, Michigan, whether it's Minneapolis, whether it's near La Crosse, Wisconsin, La Crosse being one of the most, I think, victims we have in the country, whether it's in New York City, whether it's now we've noticed only this real influx in Austin, which is accelerated. We have Chicago. Chicago's cases are different than most others in that Chicago's cases, a lot of the victims until recently were from other cities that we had other victims that they happened to go to Chicago for that weekend. So we had to try to figure out, were they ad hoc victims that the Chicago group just grabbed, or were they from the other cities where they notified the group in Chicago and said, hey, this guy's coming into town, check him out, put an eyeball on him. We want you to grab him. So that's, that's why Chicago was so distinct compared to the other cities.
So how would they pick the victims? Why would they pick the victims? And how would this even have developed? How would they have communicated? Like, how has this network developed, and what's the motive for it?
Well, we've never given the motive, because then we do that. It's right out there, and then we could have real copycat killers. We definitely want to put it together. We know who they are. We want to put it out there soon. We want to hopefully get law enforcement to really take a second look at this, that they know these aren't accidental cases. How do they communicate? We know that they're communicating through the dark web. Just like a lot of different groups do. And
but when you say the dark web, what do you mean by that?
Like some of the groups that are some of the sites that you could go to that are not, the normal person doesn't really look at them, and in fact, one of the things that we had information on was how to get into it, and we got really close, but we knew that if we went any further, then all of a sudden, we would be on camera, they would know who we were, and it would be shut down immediately. But we had some information, and we were able to track down some of the ways that they would get in, and we tried to see if we could get onto this specific dark web that they were using, some of the groups were using.
If
just as far as the other thing, as far as some groups, some victims, how they choose them, some victims are ad hoc, but it looks like, and I didn't understand this initially.
Hey, what? No, what did you say?
Some of the victims are ad hoc, where they may just find somebody in a bar, they may be talking to him, the guy exposes himself about what he is and what he's about, and they say, oh, this guy would be a perfect victim. Like when I was talking to Brooke about her brother, she said, he was such an outgoing guy, whatever, and very personable, that and open, and I'm like that kind of individual also. So I perfectly understood it, and he may have divulged his finances, where he was economically, what kind of job he had, whatever. And if they thought this was perfect, that he was one of these elite of the elite, because a lot of these kids are all, very intelligent individuals. They all come from well-to-do families, or have made it themselves a well-to-do from the jobs they're on. Like we have like 30-something engineers. You can't just tell me engineers are the only stupid people getting drunk and falling into the water.
30, right. 30 out of how many?
Well, we had over 300 victims. So, I mean, those, we don't even know what the other ones, we don't have a profile on every one of the victims, because we stopped calling the families. We don't want to victimize them anymore. We're like, hey, how you doing? I don't know if there's a theory going around, the kids are being missing, winding up in bodies of water. They're not accidental. Like I used to call in the beginning, would you I think your son might possibly be a victim. Oh my God. A lot of people want to just believe it's an accident. So we stopped doing that. So we don't have profiles. They may be 60, 70 of the 330 something people we have that are, engineers. We have doctors. We have people that were studying criminal justice to go into law enforcement. We have, what was the other thing? I'm trying to think, doctors, lawyers, military people. We have people that are involved in the military. And so it was, what we did notice was one of the things is that they're always the best of the best, as if they wanted to take these people down. My partner used to say they were jealous, envious if they had the life they didn't have. Yeah, that's part of it, but it's not. It's actually a lot more, a lot deeper and a lot more sinister than that.
When you say sinister, do you mean occult practices, satanic?
Yeah, definitely evil, but yet I've always said from the beginning that three of the things that connected these individuals was, one, gang initiation, and we have that, and we know that because we know they're gangs, and we know where they're located, where the cells are. Two,
and you know their gangs how?
Because one of the reason was obviously with all the graffiti we collected, but the guy Gilbertson who first came with us is a gang expert. He's written in that national gang crime conference thing all over the United States. He teaches all over the world. So he was really good. I mean, I did drugs, so I know a little bit about gangs. I know the difference, like the blood of Crips or the Latin King symbols, but he knew like every symbol. Like he would just see it and go, oh, that's so and so, or that's this and that, or that's this posse, or that's whatever. It's like, whether it was a biker gang, like if it was Hell's Angels, what he's, but he knew everything, whether it was this group or that group, and so those are evident and present. But the thing about the ritual aspect is there's some type of like you have the symbol down there. I think from the guy you interviewed showed 666 on the tree. That would be interesting to me. Doesn't mean it's necessarily connected to us, but that's it. And then there was something else there if they had an upside down crucifix. So there is some of that occult symbolism. And then, of course, there's just these guys are just equal opportunity hate people because they hate everybody. The equal opportunity haters. They hate everybody. So they don't differentiate between who they pick. You can be white, black, Hispanic, female, male, female, whatever, Jewish, it really doesn't matter. So they've increased the age because it used to be like sometime around like 17 to 27 was like the age, even though most of it was between like, they're mostly college kids, like 18 to 22, 23 or 25, when they're like graduate students that have some that were left over. They were usually in college. But now you're getting some young 30-year-olds or like somebody like Cliff, who might be, he was almost, I think he was like 40, but he looks like he's 30. You know what I mean? Cliff Axel, the picture I saw of him. So, and like I said, they're not gonna differentiate because he's 40. We really don't want him. There's no 50 and 60-year-olds, and because we also knew that because they wouldn't be able to get close to these guys in the bar to drug them, and that's how once we found out that they were being drugged with the GHB, it has to be somebody similar in age. And we've had people that wrote to us that were survivors that survived these things that were abducted. We've had attempted abductions where people have called us, and when I just went through some of my old cases where somebody was telling me about almost being abducted. And he said, I woke up. I don't know how I survived. Oh, I was stumbling around. My sister came running out. She kind of saved me. I think I would have been abducted, but I saw this older guy, somebody like me, in a bar, and he kept eyeballing me all night. But he was with like a 25-year-old kid, so it was like almost like a father and son. And so we know that there are people from the gangs that. They're training them, not grooming them like it was a sexual assault, but kind of like, but in the same way, grooming them on how to do these abductions. And once we started finding GHB in the bodies, in all the cases where we told the families to test for it or we tested, you have 100% success rate. That it doesn't get much better than that. So and GHB is in the body, but nobody tests for that because it's not the normal drug array where you have
it's 6, not 9. Yeah. So That's what I wanted to kind of dig into here, is that the one thing that every single one of these cases essentially has in common is that the person was probably drugged. Every time it's been tested, it's showed up, you're saying?
Right. When we tested it, or we told the family didn't have the money. They said, "Oh, just tell me what to do. I'll test for it." I said, "Listen, we'll pay for it. Just give me, we know what it was. It cost like $300. We'd get
Right.
the
So
liver tissue samples and send it to NMS in Pennsylvania."
if there's because it's possible that these people are being killed and
Right.
then their bodies thrown in the water. Does the body being thrown in the water throw off the autopsy? Does it change if the drugs show up? Because there's been a lot of questions about that.
Right. No, it really doesn't. Everybody tried to say, like in the beginning, that it washes away physical evidence. I mean, yes and no. I mean, it could, I guess, wash off some stuff, but usually blood still stays. If there was blood on the clothing, though we have proved in our TV show that you can see that there was assaults. In fact, one of our kids, we were trying to make out what the injuries were on his head, and they got a tool expert, and he wound up showing that he had footprints. Somebody was actually standing on his head to keep him down. So that meant somebody was holding his feet. So it was human intervention, and there were multiple participants. And because we knew that the marks on his head weren't from being in the river. Most of the time, you could get some abrasions, but the abrasions would have to be vertical, because the body would, when the body sinks after death, the body would sink, and then the body does not bloat until it doesn't float until it bloats. So you need bloating to float. So once the gases in the body after death start decomposing, the body will start coming up. Before it comes up, it comes up like an inch or something. Then the water current will drag it a little bit before it comes up. So you'll get these markings here. You got horizontal markings like Luke Holman had, or vertical and horizontal. That doesn't make sense. Those injuries had to happen ante-mortem before he died. So, and then, like I said, they proved that there was even more than that. There was actually footprint marks on him, from a boot. So, I think a lot of times the medical examiners are missing the evidence. Plus, we know that these victims are being held for periods of time because the amount of decomposition on the body does not match the amount of time that they've been missing for. So they're missing in the water.
Okay, so if that's the case, then what is the cause of death for these people? If are they drowning? Are they being held and then being drowned? Or are they being killed and then thrown in the water?
A lot of cases, if the victims are floating in water right after because usually the only way you float with no bloating is you would deceased on land before you went. And we found that in multiple cases. Like we have one kid, Adam Falcon, looks like he stepped out of the shower. And so, and then you look, and then if there's no water in the lungs, it's pretty hard to have a drowning when you don't have water in the lungs. Some kids are actually, probably drowned that same night or whatever, but other ones are held for a period of time with, I think, mental and some physical abuse. That's why we have some markings on them. But we haven't seen any real signs of sexual torture. But my first case, Patrick McNeil, he was burnt from the waist up. Body decomposition starts in the lower right quadrant. That's why it starts turning bluish green, and then within 24 hours it turns to green. And that's how I was, the other case I'm working on, Rodney Reed, I told you, the death row case. The reason I was able to prove that case so easily was the medical examiner said that. I was like, is he really saying that? Maybe sometimes the autopsy report doesn't, or the photographs don't match the autopsy report. And that's why we're trying to get the autopsy photos. Texas does not want to release them to Mitch. Mitch asked for the photos. They're like, they got nothing to hide. Let us see the photos if you're happy with your diagnosis. But what happened was, I looked at her. She was green up on the neck. I said, well, she's been dead for almost 24 hours. So how, she's only missing for 12. How did he kill her? Unless you could put him back in the apartment. So this is what I look at with our victims. If they're at this level of decomposition, but they're missing this long, or they have no bloating, how did they float? And they should be still on the bottom until the gases help them to rise. So there should be no bodies floating around on top that are as flat or skinny as you and me. So I mean, so that then you have, it's a total aberration. So you have to you have to look at something else that transpired.
Right. So with you mentioned Mitch with the autopsy photos, the police are
Right.
not releasing them to Mitch Gutierrez. That's
The
Martin.
medical examiner, he asked for the crime scene or autopsy photos, and he said, they make a request. He made a request, and he's to the point of, if he has to get an attorney, get an attorney. What's the reason for it? Especially his brother's case, 5 years old, is closed.
Right.
And then the new thing is, from all the people I'm hearing, is that multiple cases, people were told that the body was so bad, you should just cremate your son or your loved one. And they, or from what I'm reading from the report, the bodies weren't that bad. They could have had, some of those cases, they could have had open caskets with the amount of work that these morticians can do. And we've also had some cases where the morticians showed us injuries that were not actually mentioned in the report. They said, "Did you see this?"
For any of those in Austin?
No, that was a New York case. One of them was a New York case where he had injuries to the back, and so we were like, "Wait a minute, that's not from a drowning." So,
Okay.
we would have seen that, but and you can't get that. And then obviously now we can't even test for the GHB because you can't even have an exhumation once you once you cremate your loved one. So I would tell all these parents of the victims that if you suspect that this thing does not make sense to you, that your son would have got drunk, walked to the river, and fallen in, do not cremate the individual. I mean, even if you had a close casket, just do not get rid of any potential physical evidence that could prove homicide.
So let's just, the last question, the last main segment I want to get to here, let's call it a segment, is to talk about whether or not these water deaths in Austin over the past, let's just for
decade.
I was going to say, for what I'm aware of, is really only since probably 2017, 18, but let's say the last decade.
Well, I have them from 2012. I don't know. There was like one or two. It may have been boating accidents because, first of all, I haven't read the autopsy reports. I think it was like 2008, but it looks like really 12, and then they started upping it a little bit by, like, especially from 18, from like Martin's
Gutierrez
thing. But yeah, but there's like, I have one or two here. I have one from like 2016, two from 16, and then 18 to 23. The last 5 years, anyway. Obviously, a bigger influx.
So are these, in your opinion, connected? And if so, I doubt all of them are, but if there is case or any of the victims in Austin connected, which ones, and why would you say that they're connected?
Well, first of all, I can't connect them until I get to the scene. First, I have to see if I believe they're homicides, and it looks suspicious in a couple of cases. Obviously, Martin's case, but obviously with the occipital globe being struck by, who knows if he got hit with a pipe or a stick or something. Obviously a big stick, not a tree branch,
right? And
to cause that kind of injury. You got Christopher Pugh, who's got serious injuries, and he survives.
Now, what exactly were his injuries? For those wondering,
well, that's why I want to talk to the father. I want to find out where the injuries. I can only look at what I read in the paper, but I don't want to quote something that may be
based
wrong.
Off that, right? So because Christian Pugh, to play devil's advocate here, Christian Pugh could have been robbed or thrown off the Congress Bridge or fell off the bridge or whatever, but he could have been drugged. There's a number of things, but he was missing for 3 days. Right. And he came out of town to see Tom Segura perform stand-up, and he just got drunk and disappeared for 3 days. That doesn't really make any sense. So that's a suspicious one. Martin Gutierrez, occipital blow. Again, there's some weird camera footage. If you talk to his brother, he had a potentially bizarre interaction with a white SUV. And then Randy Lexford, obviously, in my opinion, was clearly a murder. Clearly. It looks like he was hit by a car and then thrown over Shoal Creek Bridge. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't break your femur, strongest bone in your body, I believe. You don't break your femur falling over a 15-foot bridge. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, plus there was some ritualistic graffiti on that bridge. which
That is a that bridge is there are a ton of, in recent years at least, a ton of homeless people have
right,
moved under there because of the camping ordinance and some other things. So that there are a ton of homeless people over there, and with a lot of the homeless people there is like really bizarre graffiti and
right.
stuff like that. But
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why you can't say it's 100% connected if they're into some stuff. But I can tell you one thing: is it's not homeless people that are doing this. These people are pretty well structured and organized. It's a well structured gang, you know. So
is there any were there any people I'm missing on the potential list of victims that could be connected? I know you're not going to give me a concrete answer on whether or not the victims are connected to your Smiley Face Killer theory because you haven't seen the sites.
right,
And you'll be here in a few days, and we'll go walk the site. And if you have,
right.
if possible, you'll on Sunday come and talk it, and we can have a more concrete conversation. But is there
Right.
any other hunch you have? Is there anything any info you can give us that people might not know or might be interested in? Because this is obviously like a very hot topic in Austin, and it's
Right.
you know.
Well, I'm only, like I said, I have to read. They won't get released the new the new victims, but I have, I got 130 something pages of autopsy reports here I got to look at. I can tell you that on one or two of them already, I don't see any real water in the lungs. So obviously that'll make me suspicious that the case is more likely a homicide than it would be an accident. But the problem is, some of the cases, like at least with Martin's case, it probably should have been made undetermined. To go to accident to me is like too quickly, because even though undetermined is not great because it's the catch-all, but at least you're saying, well, it's not an accident. I can't prove it's an accident. I can't prove it's a homicide either. To go, oh no, it's an accident is like, you want to close that thing as quick as possible. That annoys me. Most of the medical examiners know that it's difficult, and they also know that drowning cases are only an exclusionary diagnosis. When there's nothing else that they can prove,
That's what they
and the
go
body's
to.
found in water, they make it a
Drowning.
drowning.
Okay, so for example, the Randy Lexford case, again, I would say is it's pretty obviously a murder or a hit and run or a manslaughter situation. His body was completely mangled head to toe. There was a according to his sister Lori Faber, she said there was a mangled scooter nearby that he had been on. The case was actually suspended. It wasn't even closed, from what I understand. Again, I'm getting my information from Lori, but my point is that there's a lot of gray area and discrepancies surrounding his death, and even the police have suspended the case. So if if they don't have a conclusion there, I would be curious as to why they would say it's not a hit and run, but we don't know what it was.
So did they make the? I have to go look at the autopsy report. I haven't seen it.
This is all info that I've got from Lori.
Right, but so if the case was the case marked undetermined? Is that what it is?
I think she said it was suspended. I never read the actual police report.
Okay.
I took what she said in good faith, but I don't think they like really actually made a determination of what happened.
Right. Yes, I have to find out if it's undetermined. They could it would just be like an open file. Most cases that are undetermined, death investigations, nobody really likes them. That's why they like to get rid of them. I was saying in New York, we call them cuppies, case undetermined pending police investigation, which meant further investigation because we don't really know what happened, but we don't believe it's an accident. So we need more. And if not, those cases just remain open unless somebody comes forward. Like say somebody gets arrested, what happens usually you solve those, somebody says, I know what happened to Billy Smith and I know how he was killed. And if they got the information, then that's how you solve a lot of homicides. These cases obviously a little different because of the drowning, but you'd have to find out if they knew something. I know he's got an injury to, if it wasn't out there in the back of his head, then you say, on which side? It's like, okay, he knows. Then maybe they would change it to a homicide. But it's very difficult to get these medical examiners to change a case from accident or undetermined to homicide unless you have
Gotcha.
some real concrete proof.
Okay. Well, that's all I got for you right now. When I see you out here, I'll see you in a couple days. We'll walk that site where Thaddeus found that body. And I think I sent you that interview. So there's some
Right.
there's
Which
definitely
body was
some
that though? Do you remember which was it one
this
of
was
our
a body that was found January 5th, 2023, this year.
okay.
As far as I know, it's still unidentified.
Oh, so because I'm saying I don't have that as one of our victims that were missing, so it was unidentified. Huh? Okay.
Yeah. It's there's just a lot of gray area there. But yeah.
Could that have been one of those homeless people that they just chucked in as just to have a body?
Well, if you look at the pictures, it almost could have been like potentially a migrant worker.
Right.
I really don't know. I'll show you all the stuff I got when you get here.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what we'll do when you get here, and we'll dig into this more on the show or in person.